The ring as kind of a long shot candidate. It started out a little discouraging. I flew around the state the first day after I announced in this small airplane. It's like a two-seater airplane. My friend owned it, bought him some gas, and we're going to these stops in rural Minnesota. And like 3 people would show up, you know, at the stops. And one of them was the airport manager who had to be there anyhow. You know, so having these small press conferences. I got back to St. Paul. I was coaching soccer that summer. My 2 daughters were young. I was coaching one of their teams. So I threw off my suit and got on my coach's shirt and walked out to the field that very night, feeling kind of down about how the campaign started, and the clipboard and the whistle. And these little girls on my team came running up. And they were very excited. And they're saying, "Are you running for governor? Are you running for governor?" I thought, wow, this campaigning really does work. And I've only been at it for 8 hours, and my message has permeated the brains of these 6 or 7-year-old girls. I said, this is really working. I've got momentum. And I'll never forget it. And I kind of puffed up proudly. I said, yeah, I'm running for governor. This one little girl, Kelly, she looked up and she said, cool. Do you think you could give me Jesse Ventura's autograph? Well, I'm delighted to be here to have a chance to introduce myself to you and to the Rotary of Iowa and to continue our campaign for president. I'm running for president of the United States because I love this country as you do, but you know America's in trouble. And I've got the experience and the leadership and the values and the ideas and the record of results to lead America to a better place. We now live at a time, as you know, where we've got nearly $4 a gallon gas. We have crushing levels of unemployment. We have a federal government that seems like it is out of control, including measures of debt and deficit that are drowning the nation, literally pulling us down from within. And we've got to have a country that pulls together and identifies the real challenges and puts real solutions on the table and leaders that will move it forward in a positive and constructive way. So when I announced my campaign in Des Moines a few weeks ago, we labeled the theme of that day and the theme of the campaign, it's a time for the truth. And we've had now 3 years of a president and a campaign before that filled with very high oratory, very lovely speeches, soaring rhetoric. But the country doesn't need more rhetoric. What it needs is making sure that we roll up our sleeves and put our head down, put our shoulders back, and get this thing on a better path and do the hard work of actually getting the results to get that done. So we came to Iowa and said it's time for each of us to look each other in the eye and tell the truth about the challenges the nation is facing. And that includes telling some hard truths everywhere, including in Iowa. So if you're running for president and the first state in the process is Iowa, you probably wouldn't have the first thing come out of your mouth say it's time to phase out the ethanol subsidies. But I did that not because I don't think ethanol has a good future and renewable fuels don't have a good future, but because given the size of the hole that we're in, we're going to have to look at all the subsidies. I'm not just picking on ethanol. We're going to have to review all the subsidies and reduce and eliminate many or most of them. And so this is a situation where leaders are going to have to be candid. I call it the Jack Nicholson election from A Few Good Men when he's sitting, and women, when he was sitting on the witness stand in that movie. He said, you can't handle the truth. Well, the American people can handle the truth. They just need leaders to tell it to them. They need leaders who are going to have the courage to put specific solutions on the table and show in a fair and positive way that we can get this thing moving again. And it wasn't just ethanol in Iowa. I went down to Florida and talked to seniors and next generation leaders about what it's going to take to really fix Social Security in detail. We went up to Wall Street and told the Wall Street bankers, you got your snout in the government trough as deep as anybody, and you're going to have to get it out. When I'm president, there's going to be no more carve-outs or bailouts or handouts for you. And then we went to the public employee union leaders in the Washington, D.C. establishment and said to them, you can't get paid more in compensation benefits than the people paying the bill. And on down the list. But you should know the magnitude of this challenge. I think you do know it if you see the news or read the newspaper. As you're sitting here this morning for roughly an hour from when you convene the meeting, the federal government will spend $144 million of money that they don't have just while you're eating breakfast and listening to this speech. That's about $40,000 a second in debt or deficit that they spend every second, every hour, every day, every week, every month, and it is out of control. They're running a Ponzi scheme of the highest order. If they were in the private sector, they'd probably be indicted. I mean, it is that bad. For every dollar they spend, they don't have 40 cents of it. And so you can't run your family like that. You can't run your business like that. You can't run the Rotary Club like that, right, bro? And we can't let our federal government run like that anymore. And just because we followed Greece into democracy doesn't mean we're going to follow them into bankruptcy, or should follow them into bankruptcy. So we've got to get this thing fixed. Now, a couple of things. Before we talk about what we're going to reduce or slow down, we've got to talk about getting the economy moving again. And this is not about getting the government moving or growing, it's about getting the private economy moving. If we had a chance to go around this table and talk about what's important to you, what do you value, I think we hear stories about the importance that you place on your family and the importance that you place on your faith. I think we hear the importance that you place on things like getting your health care premiums paid and the worries that you may have about paying for your kids' college, and maybe if you have a little extra money in the pocket or the purse, you might have an idea or a goal about getting the basement finished or something like that, or maybe watching the Golden Gophers come down here and get beat by Iowa. But if you listen to that list, it requires something. It requires people to have money. And guess where most people get money? They get money by having a job. And they get jobs by having companies that want to start and grow in Iowa and in Minnesota and hopefully all across this country. Now, we had a 10-year-old at a recent campaign event. His name was Malin. He came up to the microphone and he said this, literally. He said, Governor, he explained this economic situation, I think, very well from the eyes of a 10-year-old. He said this, if you keep the taxes low, people will have more money. And if people have more money, they'll buy more things. And if people buy more things, the businesses will be busier. And if the businesses are busier, they're going to hire more people. And if they hire more people, then they'll have more money. And then they'll buy more things. And so on and so on. We shouldn't have to look to a 10-year-old in Iowa to know more about the private economy than the President of the United States. We have an economy now where the President said if you don't pass the stimulus bill, in my view, government sustenance bill, if you don't pass the stimulus bill, the unemployment rate could go up to 8%. And so we have to be able, all of us, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, neither, be able to precisely ask and answer the question, what are those things that we can do to make it more likely that jobs are going to grow in Iowa, Minnesota, and in this country? What are those things that we can do to encourage businesses to start and grow? And the answer to that question does not reside with the politicians in Washington, D.C. Most of them have never worked in the private sector in their life. The answer resides with the people who actually do that, day in and day out. And they are screaming across this country at the top of their lungs when you ask them that question, Governor, get the government off my back. 6 million businesses in this country. 5.9 million of them have 500 employees or less. This is mostly about what can we do to get small and medium-sized businesses to start and grow. And when you ask them what matters to you, what are the things that we can do to make that more likely, and I speak to hundreds of them every week, they say, Governor, the taxes are too high, the regulations are too slow, too burdensome, too discouraging, too uncertain, too confusing, the energy costs are too high, the healthcare costs are too high, the litigation costs are too high, and on down the list. He said, you got to make the burdens lower, not higher. You got to make the load lighter, not heavier. Now, every politician is going to come to a group like this and say, hey, I'm the pro-jobs, fill in the blank person. I'm the pro-jobs mayor. I'm the pro-jobs member of Congress. I'm the pro-jobs legislator. Well, you cannot be pro-jobs and anti-business. That's like being pro-egg and anti-chicken. That doesn't work. And so we have to quit suffocating the businesses in this country. We have to do those things that are going to unleash job growth. So I went to the University of Chicago a few weeks ago and gave the most specific, most aggressive, pro-job growth, pro-economic speech of any candidate in the race, including the president. By the way, it's his former place of employment, the University of Chicago. And it's on our website if you want to read the whole thing at timpawlenty.com. But let me give you the Reader's Digest version. It says, let's take the corporate tax rate from one of the highest in the world at 35% and bring it down to something closer to the front of the pack at 15%. But in exchange for that, clean out in a flat tax way all or as most of the special credits and deductions as possible under that rate. So businesses will have to compete based on their ability to connect with actual customers in a marketplace rather than their ability to connect with lobbyists and members of Congress in Washington, D.C. and get their little special deal in the tax code. We'll have a flatter, more transparent, more pro-investment, more pro-jobs business tax code in this country. Now, the individual rates, the gentleman was right. We propose to go from 6 to 2 and simplify that 10 and 25%. The tax code and all of the regulations and supporting documents is about 9,000 pages. I don't know about you, but I think that is a ridiculous, intimidating system. I filled out a W-4 form not long ago. It was a half a page long. It required your name and social security number and address and a few other things. And it came with about 3 pages of instructions. I used to be a lawyer. I'm not anymore. I read those instructions. I read them twice. I had a hard time understanding it. I think as one of our tax reforms in this country, we should require by law and under penalty of perjury every member of Congress to complete his or her own tax returns without the help of a lawyer, tax preparer, or accountant. Let them experience each year personally and intimately the mindless, ridiculous, burdensome, expensive, intimidating monster that is the U.S. tax code. And I think it wouldn't be too long if we did that you'd see some pretty significant tax reform. A few other quick things on the economy. There's more we have to do besides tax reform. We have to obviously get the spending under control. I'll talk more about that in just 1 second. But we've got to have an energy policy that stabilizes price by bringing up supply. And the policy is described in my campaign as more American energy. We've got an energy policy now that has us hooked to places that don't like us, are hostile to us, create economic instability, security instability, and we've got to get a more American energy, not just for security reasons, but also for our economy. We've got some tremendous opportunities in this regard, but let me give you just a couple by way of example. We now have found enough natural gas in the territorial reach of the United States of America, and just in the last 5 years, to supply the entire baseload energy needs of the country for 75 to 200 or more years, according to most experts. It's a game-changing opportunity for American energy and energy supply in this country, and we should go get it. And you've got a tremendous opportunity to continue to lead the nation in renewable energy in Iowa, as we have in Minnesota, in so many areas. But one example is the wind energy business. It's a tremendous part of the renewable energy portfolio. But the government's policies in this regard, say you can have a production tax credit, but we're not going to tell you more than 1 year at a time whether it's going to exist after that. Well, you got people who are willing to invest in plants and equipment and production and the like, but they need to know more than a year at a time whether that's going to be there or not, because it takes them a while to get the permits, get the investments lined up, build the facilities, and take advantage of it. So if we're going to have a tax credit like that, let's give it a 3 or 5 year window so people can plan accordingly and decide their intermediate future in a place like Iowa or Minnesota and across the country. We're going to have to do healthcare reform the right way. With all due respect to the president, I think he just has an incredibly different worldview when it comes to these kinds of issues. His solution is to drag it into Washington, D.C., create a top-down command and control system where the government begins to limit your choices down to a few or to one, begins to regulate it in ways that are run out of Washington, D.C., staffed by bureaucrats, staffed by government employees. I don't think a system where the government takes things over and creates top-down systems is the right way to go, particularly for healthcare. We do need to fix the system, but it needs to be focused on market forces. People have to understand what the price of the product is, what the quality measurements of the product is. The people who provide the service have to be able to get paid other than based on volume of service. If I bill Chris for volume, I can tell you what Chris is going to get. A lot of volume. And so Chris has to be responsible not just for volume of procedures, but whether people are getting better, whether their health is getting better. Those are the kinds of reforms we did in Minnesota, and it worked. And lastly, just on spending, look, everybody's going to say, of course we have to tighten our belt, of course we have to get the spending under control, of course we have to live within our means. I don't know about you, but I don't trust anymore that we can send politicians to Washington, D.C., and then on average over time they're going to do the right thing when it comes to living within our means and getting the nation's finances balanced. I think the time has come for all of us, both sides of the aisle, to call for a constitutional amendment to require the federal government to balance its books just like everybody else has to. We got to have some guardrails and some limits around these politicians. Now, everybody's going to say, yeah, we got to do that. But on all these things, I've actually done it. And I don't know if you know about Minnesota politics, but it's not exactly a centrist or conservative. It's pretty far the other way. So it's the land of Eugene McCarthy and Walter Mondale and Hubert Humphrey and Paul Wellstone. And now we have United States Senator Al Franken in Minnesota. So a lot of candidates on my party are going to roll through town and say, look, I can do this stuff. I propose to do it. I've actually done it as an executive in one of the most difficult political environments in the country. Took spending from historic highs to historic lows. I cut taxes net over 8 years during my time as governor, even though we had 2 recessions. We were one of the first states in the nation to move from seniority pay to performance pay statewide and offer it statewide for teachers. We did public employee compensation reform before it was cool and popular, and welfare reform and healthcare reform the right way, and litigation reform, and down the list. And so one of the themes of our race is we're going to make sure we don't talk about not just what we're going to do, but that we've done this already based on a record of results, because there's a big difference between giving speeches and offering failed amendments in Congress and getting these things done as a leader, as an executive, and I've done that in all of these categories as the chief executive of one of the most difficult political environments for a conservative in the country. So I'd like to leave the rest of the time for your questions and the like and comments, but I want to leave you with one thought. That is, we're the greatest country the world's ever known. You might just step back, all of us together, and say, well, why is that? What separates us from the rest of the world? Why the United States of America? And we, of course, have been blessed in many, many ways. But we're the greatest country the world's ever known, not because we're the biggest. We only have a little over 300 million people here. We're competing against places that are, 4 or 5 times bigger. We're not the greatest country in the world because we're the cheapest. There's lots of places that are, more, cut our costs below where we are, although we do need to be more competitive. So if we're not the biggest,